NFL scouting combine talk regarding the cornerback position and Howie Roseman's free agency approach in just a few weeks. All that and more on this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to a Friday edition of the show. You can find us Monday through Friday on all podcast platforms. We are your only daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. As always, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The NFL scouting combine, continues to roll through Indianapolis. Yesterday was the workouts for the defensive line. Gino Camilleri, my co-host, he did a recap show on YouTube and all podcast platforms. Today, it was the defensive backs, it was corners and safeties, and those are positions right now that I think the future is up in the air on the Eagles defense. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, safety, star safety in 2022, is a free agent. Marcus Epps, other starting safety, free agent. James Bradbury, the opposite corner of Darius Slay, an all-pro in 2022. He is also an unrestricted free agent, and he is probably not coming back for 2023. So today was a day for the combine where I think the Eagles were paying very close attention. The organization themselves, fans, and the media, because the Eagles need defensive back help. I think they're going to sign CGJ and Epps at safety, but when it comes to corner, Darius Slay is going to be here next year, but he's pushing the end of his prime. Has had the two best years of his career, I think, though, in back-to-back seasons with Philadelphia. But, he's going to be on the opposite end of 30 by the time that next year rolls around. And James Bradbury is going to cash in, I think, with another organization, another guy that's older, and the Eagles just can't afford to pay. So I know myself and Gino and a lot of you out there were watching these workouts intensely as the Eagles have the 10th overall pick in this coming draft and 30th overall. This is a loaded cornerback class. You look at the top tier players like Christian Gonzalez of Oregon running a 4.34 today. I could feel Gino's excitement even over the Twitter timeline. Could you imagine? We've had some awesome live draft reactions for our live draft show we have every year during the first round, right? The A.J. Brown trading up for Devontae Smith, to see, or even when they took J.J. Arcega-Whiteside in 2019 or the Jalen Hurts pick in 2020. We've had some iconic live moments. But if Gino got his boy, Oregon corner Christian Gonzalez, at 10th overall, I think he'd lose his mind. But then you had Devon Witherspoon of Illinois. You've got Kelly Ringo of Georgia, Joey Porter Jr. from Penn State in the 99th percentile when it comes to length. This is the year that the Eagles need to, and I'm not saying don't prioritize the trenches the majority of the time. I'm not saying don't take an offensive and defensive lineman with two of your three picks that you have in the first and second round this year. But this has to be the season that Howie Roseman gets one of these cornerbacks to come to Philadelphia, even if it's not with that 10th overall pick. If you move down from 10 and you take a guy later, if you take a guy from 30, if you trade up from 30 earlier in the first round, if you take a guy in the second round, regardless, this has to be the year that you invest in this position for long-term talent, because I think Bradbury's gone next year. And as I mentioned, Darius Slay, yeah, you're going to have him for another season or two of top-tier corner play, but after that, there's no guarantees. And outside of those two players, Avonte Maddox is under contract. He's an elite slot corner, but on the boundary, who do you have long-term? Zech McPherson? I don't think the Eagles believe in him long-term to be a long-term starter. So this is the season where I'm not even saying don't take linemen with these other picks. All I'm asking the Eagles to do is invest in the cornerback position with one premier draft asset. They took Sidney Jones in the second round in 2017, right? And outside of that, what have they done early in the draft of the cornerback position since Lito Shepherd? He was the last one they took in the first round back in 2002 2002. They haven't, Sidney Jones in 2017. And I'm thinking about third round picks, Rasul Douglas in 2017. I'm thinking about Curtis Marsh back in 2011. Their cornerback plans have always been free agency or trades. Asante Samuel, Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie, Nnamdi Asomugha, Bradley Fletcher, Kerry Williams, Leotis McKelvin. The list goes on and on. Ronald Darby. and then Darius Slay, James Bradbury. So even Steven Nelson last year. This is the year that they need a long-term player, and this is the class to do it because the 2023 draft, I would say, is not very deep and talented at a lot of spots. I think receiver, this is a down year for receiver. I don't love the running back talent outside of Bijan Robinson. I think you look at linebacker, it can be thin, even safety, but cornerback. Daniel Jeremiah said it himself, and so did John Harbaugh in his press conference, the Baltimore Ravens head coach yesterday. John Harbaugh said he thinks 10 cornerbacks have the talent to be first-round picks this year. It is absolutely loaded. And I love the tweet that my co-host Gino Camilleri said today. And I want to read this because it's so true when it comes to cornerback. He said the cornerback conversation in this draft is similar to that of quarterback, in my opinion. It's like Baskin-Robbins. What's your preferred choice? The insane length of Joey Porter Jr. from Penn State, the pure athleticism of Christian Gonzalez from Iowa, the true do-it-all ability of Devon Witherspoon from Illinois. And that's an exciting thing because the Eagles could choose to approach this position in any way in the first and second round. And I still think that they can come away with a legitimate player, even if it's a Kelly Ringo from Georgia. And you think he's a little more raw, but he has all the traits you want. He can be your version of Tariq Woolen. And then you, let's say, sign Marcus Peters on a prove-it one-year deal, or Patrick Peterson, who I think the Eagles had interest in last year before they signed James Bradbury. That's an option they can do. They can just sit and take one at 10. They can take one in the second round. There are a lot of players. It is 10-plus deep at this position in the first two rounds. So I think the Eagles have to emphasize taking a corner early, regardless of what you do in free agency. Unless you're paying James Bradbury, which again, of all the free agents, I would say he's the most likely to be gone next year. Unless you're bringing Bradbury back, the draft is the long-term fix at this position. And you've passed for years now. Like I said, Sidney Jones, and outside of that, it was Lito Shepherd. The last time I can remember a corner going in the first and second round for the Eagles. And that wasn't always their fault. I think the last 2 years, they definitely would have had some interest in Sauce Gardner and not Devin Singletary, Derek Stingley, of LSU, but they both went inside the top 5. So you didn't have a chance at those players. And then you look at the year before, yeah, they moved it up for Devontae Smith, and I think they loved Devontae, and he was atop their board. But if Patrick Surtain falls, if J.C. Horn falls, are the Eagles interested? You bet your ass they're interested. So sometimes it's been how the board's fallen that they haven't had a shot at these top prospects. Also because quarterbacks haven't gone as early in those drafts, so it hasn't pushed these guys down the board. But they've also at times passed on these guys for offensive linemen. You look at last year. I know Tariq Woolen went in the 5th round. I thought he should have been a first-round pick. They passed on him in the 2nd round for a lineman, for Cam Jurgens. You look at the year before. I love Landon Dickerson, and I do not question the Eagles for taking Dickerson in the 2nd round. He is one of the best young offensive linemen in football. But they did pass on Asante Samuel Jr. They did pass on Tyson Campbell, who are with the Jaguars now and the Chargers, and they're really good young corners. So again, yes, you prioritize the trenches over corner, but not every single year, not every single draft, especially when you have all 3 picks in the 1st and 2nd round at your disposal. Again, I'm not even saying don't prioritize the trenches and don't use the majority of your picks on those spots. You need help long-term on both sides of the trenches as well. But I'm just asking for one pick. And watching the combine today, looking at all the talent and all the variety, as Gino was talking about at this position, I'm just asking for one guy for 1 year. It's okay. You can take a cornerback one time, Howie Roseman. It's going to be okay. I hope he does. I would predict he does as well. Even if it's not with the 10th pick, with that 30th pick, or with that, I think it's 56 overall in the 2nd round. Got to get back into the mock draft mode so I memorize the order of all these Eagles picks. But cornerback today, very interesting. A lot of talent, a lot of variety. Get your questions in about that position on Twitter at LockedOnBirds and at DiBiase LOE. I want to flip the script and change gears here coming up next on this Friday edition of LOE. I want to talk about free agency and Howie Roseman's approach to signing his in-house players that are now on the open market. So that's coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. And guys, today's show is sponsored by Built Bar. Looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories? And you got to try a Built Bar. We just got through the holiday season and the winter. And I know my goal now is to get that summer bod back, right? It's to eat healthier. But if you're like me and you don't want to sacrifice taste for health and you got that something sweet tooth right after you have a salty dinner, then Built Bar is your replacement for that Reese's Cup, for the Kit Kat, for whatever your craving is. It's healthy and it's tasty. What makes it so good? Well, for starters, it's actually covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate, and they come in unbelievable flavors. You got churro. I'm a peanut butter guy. Love me some peanut butter brownie. Coconut almond. Didn't like to really dabble in coconut growing up, but I don't know if my palate's changing, but I'm into the coconut almond Built Bar as well. Not sure how Built does it, but these bars taste great and they're healthy. Only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar in every bar with a whopping 17 grams of protein. Now you don't need to wait around for a box. For years, we've been telling you to go get them at Built.com. Now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puff. If you're close to Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with our hit flavors, brownie batter, and churro. You can thank me later, and we thank Built Bar for sponsoring the Locked On Eagles podcast today. All right, Eagles fans, we're wrapping up the week with some more Eagles talk every single day, Monday through Friday, right here on LOE. We talked about how I'm desperate for the Eagles to draft a cornerback in this year's draft. It's deep. It's top heavy too with star power. There's so many different varieties of different kinds of corners. If you want the lengthy athletic guy like a Kelly Ringo or a Joey Porter, who's going to be a fan favorite because he went to Penn State, of course, but he's a CB1 for a lot of draft analysts. I think he could be worth that 10th overall pick. I like Devon Witherspoon the most. Reminds me a lot of Asante Samuel Jr. Gino loves Christian Gonzalez because he went to Oregon, but also he's an athletic freak that has incredible body control, doesn't even really use that speed and get to that top gear a lot because he doesn't have to. There are a lot of corners in this draft that I hope the Eagles consider. Of course, though, free agency comes before the draft, and Howie Roseman has a lot of work cut out for him. He's got a lot of starters that are on the open market now on offense. Isaac Seumalo and Miles Sanders. On defense, you've got Fletcher Cox, Javon Hargrave, Brandon Graham, and Ndamukong Suh, Linval Joseph, both starting linebackers, TJ Edwards and Kazir White, your starting corner on the other side of Slay, James Bradbury, both starting safeties, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, Marcus Epps. Look, I know you can't pay everybody, right? Howie, in most of his interviews at the Combine this week, has been very controlled and, I think setting the expectation, look, we are going to lose players, right? It's a salary cap league. We're about to pay our franchise quarterback a huge contract extension. Jalen Hurts is going to make upwards of $50+ million a year, and he's going to take up a huge percentage of your cap. So he's setting the expectation. He's saying, look, we have draft picks. We have 2 first-round picks. We have a second. We have 2 seconds next year. We're going to get a lot of comp picks probably in the middle rounds because we're going to lose some of these free agents. He's basically saying, again, we're not going to make the mistakes of after 2017 where we were sentimental and held on to some players for too long, like Alshon Jeffrey and, Jason Peters. And he kind of set the expectation. We're not going to just try to run it back with everybody. We have to be smart, and it is a business. We got to cut ties with the heart. If Fletcher Cox wants too much money, we got to let him go. If a team offers Brandon Graham a huge contract, we got to let him go. Javon Hargrave, even, he's 30 years old. Are we going to pay him $23 million a year? Most likely not. And I think that's good. Howie knows now in the NFL, everything's a balance. You need young players on rookie deals. You need players in their prime that are worth paying. You need those cheaper contracts as well, those 1-year prove-it deals you can take advantage of, like you did this year with a James Bradbury. You need a balance with the roster, right? And I think he did a perfect job of balancing the roster in 2022. So I think he's setting that expectation. He's trying to learn from his past mistakes. But at the same time, I hope Howie Roseman is not scared to pay a lot of players that are free agents because of what happened after 2017. Because when you look at a lot of these free agents that are available in-house for the Eagles, they're not 33 years old and they're not heart picks. To me, if you pay Javon Hargrave, I don't think that's a sentimental pick where you're hanging on to a guy when he's past his prime. Javon Hargrave right now is a top tier pass rushing defensive tackle. I would think, overpaying Fletcher Cox is sentimental. So is Brandon Graham. I think you got to be controlled in not overpaying for a 30-year-old cornerback like James Bradbury. But at the same time, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is 25 years old, coming off the best season of his career. And he's a Swiss Army knife that can do everything. Paying Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is smart for the short term. and the long term. Paying one of these linebackers, TJ Edwards or Kazir White. I know you have Nakobe Dean, but I don't want to lose both of those players. On offense, I get being controlled and not wanting to pay Miles Sanders at the running back position. Isaac Seumalo as well, not breaking the bank on a right guard when you have Jeff Stoutland, when you have an elite 4/5 of your line already intact, right? So again, I get the responsibility and I get prioritizing long-term and balancing the long-term and the short-term. But again, this Eagles team was historically good last year. I don't want suddenly there to be all of this change where you're not trying to run it back at all to win a Super Bowl next year. I don't want to lose both Javon Hargrave and Fletcher Cox. Am I willing to lose one? Yeah, for sure, because you have Jordan Davis, you have Milton Williams, you have these picks. You can say, let's sign Sue for cheaper than Cox and let Fletcher go, or let's sign Fletcher Cox to a more team-friendly deal than Javon Hargrave will get. But to me, the Eagles can't afford to lose both of their starters on the interior of the defensive line and put all their eggs in the Milton Williams, Jordan Davis basket. I like both of them, but Hargrave and Cox were really good last year. And Hargrave, to me, is still in his prime, even at 30. He's aging like a fine wine. I don't want to lose both those guys. And suddenly, if Sue and Joseph are gone too, you're thin in the defensive line. There's no way Howie Roseman is going to let that happen. Last year, they were 5-6 deep on the interior. They can't afford to lose all of that depth and all of that top-tier talent. Again, be responsible. But Cox or Hargrave, I think, have to come back next year. And again, I don't want to lose both linebackers. They were great last year, and they're young. Choose one, Edwards or White. Pay one, let the other walk, and let Nakobe Dean replace them. I don't want to lose both CGJ and Marcus Epps. Do you think Reed Blankenship can start over Epps, and he's a lot cheaper on an undrafted rookie contract? Okay, pay CGJ, start Blankenship, sign a cheaper free agent, like Jimmy Johnson, right, if he's going to get cut from the Cleveland Browns, or, draft somebody on day 2 with one of those comp picks. Or if CGJ is not worth it because you want to pay Javon Hargrave and you re-sign Marcus Epps and you go safety in the first round, I'm not going to be happy about it. But I just don't want to see a complete just gutting of the 2022 roster, because these guys are not all in their 30s and on the way down. TJ Edwards is in his prime. Kazir White's in his prime. Marcus Epps and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson are in their primes. I still think Hargrave is in his prime. Offense, again, I'm okay if Seumalo and Sanders leave, but I think Roseman on defense needs to keep at least half of those starters. So it's going to be interesting to see what his approach is. Again, he's got to be disciplined. He's got to balance things. He's got a lot of draft picks and a lot of his core locked up already. But I really do hope that they don't lose everybody, but like they just pay CGJ, but then they're like, we can't pay anybody else. Sorry. And again, I know there's options in free agency from other teams too that will be cheaper at some of these spots, but this team had incredible chemistry last year, and some of these guys were just absolutely amazing. So, and again, I know Hurts is getting that contract soon, but you can backload deals if there's a younger player like CGJ. I think you can pay CGJ and Hargrave. You backload the CGJ deal, you load up Hargrave up front because he's an older player, because you're going to backload the hell out of Hurts' deal. So I hope Howie finds a way to get it done and keep a good amount of the score still intact so they can try to win a Super Bowl in 2023. I want to talk a little more about Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox coming up next to wrap up the show. So we'll be right back. This is a Friday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, we're wrapping up this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Lou DiBiase riding solo. Gino will be back Monday. It's our first mock draft Monday of the 2023 offseason, post-combine edition. Today was the cornerback workouts and safety. Yesterday was the defensive line and I believe linebackers as well. Tomorrow is all the skill position players. That's the ones that people are excited about. Quarterback, receiver, running back, got offensive linemen as well coming up. So once the combine's done, we have we've got 7-round mock draft on the show Monday podcast platform. So I'm wrapping up the show talking more though about free agency and what Howie Roseman's approach is going to be to signing so many available free agents that were on the Eagles roster in 2022. I hope he finds a balance. I hope he keeps a lot of these guys, but at the same time, I understand why you wouldn't pay Sayamalu and Sanders and Cox and White and Bradbury, but I don't want to lose Hargrave and Gardner Johnson and Edwards and Miles Sanders and Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham. This team can't be completely gutted of their veteran depth, of their players in their prime, even with Hurts's contract coming up. I get being responsible and being disciplined. So, for instance, a Fletcher Cox, a Brandon Graham, you got to be careful. You don't do what Howie did in 2018, 2019, and 2020 and hold on to these players for too long and be very sentimental, right? He backloaded Alshon Jeffrey's deal, and that was a huge mistake. He kept bringing Jason Peters back. Although, I should say, I want to backtrack on the Peters thing. Peters was good in 2018 and 2019. Coming back and making him a right guard in 2020 and then giving him a raise to play left tackle again when Andre Dillard got hurt, that was definitely a mistake that had a lot to do with their love for Peters and what he did for them, not what he was going to do, right? He brings back Deshaun Jackson. There were a lot of those sentimental things. He kept bringing back Darren Sproles, and I don't think that it helped this roster, and it didn't help Miles Sanders, at least until Sproles got hurt, and then he blocked me on Twitter for that take. But again, you got to be careful with that. And I think BG and Cox are the main available free agents that's where the conversation goes back to. Brandon Graham, he said in an interview yesterday that he wants to play 2 more years, and he does prefer that it's with the Eagles. I think of the two, BG would be more willing to take a very team-friendly deal, finish off his career with the Eagles. 2 more years would make him with the team for 15 seasons, nearly 2 decades. That would be incredible. He's going to have his jersey retired, right? Coming off a career year would just be an awesome story. A leader, a fan favorite. Honestly, should have a statue outside of Lincoln Financial Field. I think he's more likely to take that deal, whereas Fletcher Cox, a little younger, coming off, I think, his best season since, 2019? 7 sacks last year, which somehow was only 5th on the defensive line in sack totals. I think Fletch will probably get a bigger deal, but maybe the Eagles bring Cox back and Hargrave leaves, but they got to be disciplined with those two, Graham and Cox. I heard a rumor today that Cox and Graham might both be interested in a reunion with Jim Schwartz in Cleveland, which would be interesting. I think, again, I'm more okay with Fletcher Cox leaving if they bring Hargrave back, but Graham, the Eagles need defensive end depth as much as they need interior depth, right? You got Josh Sweat and Hassan Reddick locked up, but after that, they don't have anything. I mean, they have Patrick Johnson, and that is it. The Eagles like to be at least 4 deep on the defensive line, on the defensive end position. So you already need one even if Brandon Graham comes back, right? Robert Quinn was not that guy. They'll probably end up drafting somebody or signing a lower tier free agent to come in for that role. But if you lose Brandon Graham as well, then with one of those first-round picks, you have to take an edge. I think they probably will anyway, but then you have to. So I think Brandon Graham is just, he's aging so well, and he's so perfect for that third defensive end role. It's why he had a career year in sacks, because now I don't think he has to carry the load at 35 years old with Riddick and Sweat as the starters. He's just that perfect rotational edge, and I really want him back. Again, not for too much money. You have to be disciplined, and if Cleveland offers Brandon Graham a bag, you got to let him go. But to me, I think I'd rather have Graham back than Cox. But again, with Howie, you gotta have a number set for those two and say, we're not going above this. Do you want to finish your career with the team that you are a legend of, or do you want to end your career with a team like the Cleveland Browns? I think to be honest, I think it's pretty lame, if not more so for Cox, because I don't think Cox is done in a year or two. I think he's still going to play for, I would say, another 3 seasons probably as a rotational role player on the defensive line, with probably another 1 good season and a couple other decent ones left in his career. Brandon Graham, again, he's going to be done in a year or two. So does he really want to just take more money and play for the Browns and finish his career there instead of, again, I know money's a big part of this business. And again, this is the first time in his career he had double-digit sacks. This is a time for him to cash in. And he's done a lot for the Eagles when it comes to being team friendly. But I don't know. Maybe it's more for me. I'm thinking, I don't know if I'm putting too much importance into legacy, and I don't think it would damage his legacy if Brandon Graham left or Fletcher Cox this offseason. But if I'm Brandon Graham, I'm like, okay, I'm only playing for a year or two anyway. I'm 35 years old. I'm not going to go to another team and be a starter. Yeah, he might get a lot more money from the Browns, but I mean, you are a god in the city of Philadelphia. Just and it's not like they're bad. It's not like he's coming back from 2020 to 2021. It's a transition year. You don't know if you're going to be good. You're going to compete for another Super Bowl with Philadelphia. I don't know. To me, that's more important, the legacy and the title run, than one more year of some good money. I don't know. I think it'd be pretty lame if Brandon Graham left. Fletcher Cox, I would understand more. BG, for both sides, the Eagles need to work harder to bring him back than Fletch. And I think BG should take the team-friendly deal. I don't know if, again, maybe it's not fair to say for Graham, who's dealt with a lot in Philadelphia, who's stuck through a lot of eras, the thick and the thin. But I don't know. I mean, again, I guess maybe you fit more in Jim Schwartz's scheme, but in Jonathan Gannon's defense last year, you were in a perfect role where you had, 11 sacks. And I don't know. I would love to see, I really want to see him. My heart is saying I want to see him finish his career with the Eagles. Fletcher Cox too, and I'm okay with him coming back if Hargrave leaves. I don't want to lose both, but I think Javon's the priority right now. So we'll continue to monitor how things go. Free agency is right around the corner, and we got you covered right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day, Monday through Friday, on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. Thanks as always for making Locked On Eagles your first listen every day. Make sure your second listen is the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. They provide in-depth coverage of the biggest NFL draft prospects. A lot of takeaways after the NFL scouting combine. They got deep dives into the sleepers and hidden gems that can change your favorite NFL franchise. Find Locked On NFL Draft wherever you get Locked On Eagles. As always, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. Thank you for downloading Locked On Eagles. Thank you for watching and listening, and let's go Birds.